Welcome to a little Femme Furious, fully loaded bonus episode where we're back in Stranger Things territory and we're talking about gates. And I don't mean the one that, transitions us from Hawkins to the Upside Down. I'm talking about gatekeepers, specifically the Duffer Brothers, who wrote a 3-hour Broadway play that contains essential canon to one of the biggest TV franchises in the world. And I want to talk about it. We're diving into Stranger Things' first shadow right after this. Welcome back to Femme Furious. I am your host, Julia Rose Portella, and today we're diving into Stranger Things' first shadow, which I had the pleasure of seeing yesterday on Broadway with my beautiful family. And before we even get into the feminism, the gender politics, all of the authoritarian dynamics that happen across Stranger Things, and particularly some of the feminist and gender conversations that happen subtly, albeit they do happen in the first shadow, I just need to acknowledge that this production was absolutely wild. It was one of the most immersive theater experiences that I've had in a while. And as somebody who grew up a theater kid and went to school for theater, I could tell you I've seen a lot of shows. This just felt so easy to sink back into this world. And there's something really magical about sharing a live experience with somebody, whether that's a concert or a play, even going to a movie together with a bunch of people. It is why I pushed my family and my sisters to go see Stranger Things on New Year's Eve as it was playing in theaters, because my sisters, who are younger than I am, who have never really had that experience where you're sitting in the theater and it's just packed out with people who just love a franchise or love a thing. And for me, I was lucky enough to do that with pretty much every Harry Potter movie, especially the later ones. I saw pretty much every, I think from the fifth Harry Potter on, I saw the midnight release, all of the Avengers movies, Twilight. I was so fortunate to grow up in this era where people went to the movies together and you experienced a thing together, and it was so powerful. And even though my sisters were a little reluctant to go and do this thing, I really thought hey, going to see Stranger Things, this property that's been in your life for 10 years. For my sisters, a little bit less than that, because 10 years ago, they were a little too young to watch Stranger Things. But by the time they were able to watch it and they could binge all of it and catch up on it, it's been in our lives for such a long time, give it a good send off. And my family had been flip-flopping about whether we wanted to go see the play before or after. And it never really worked out. It never really panned out. But we just went for my sister's Sweet 16, and this was great. Immediately, you felt the connection to the show. It was so impressive. I thought some of the things that they did, which I'll talk about some of the semantics. So needless to say, spoilers for Stranger Things First Shadow. I'm diving into all of it today. This will be just a quickie episode. I'm just giving you my initial thoughts and reactions and stuff that I kind of wrote down on the car ride home back to Long Island, where I reside. But yeah, I thought this was really great as far as the theater experience goes. The show in its entirety operates like a Netflix property. So there was a cold open, and after that cold open, as we're all clapping, and I was looking at my sisters and I was grabbing onto them, so excited. It was awesome. The cold open was awesome. And the cold open is something I really want to talk about too, because I think that this is maybe the spinoff that we are getting with Stranger Things. I don't know if it's been confirmed actually, and I haven't done any research, because by the time we were at the end of Stranger Things and I had covered every season of Stranger Things up until this point, in a sort of binge frantic frenzy, I was ready to put it aside for a moment. But yeah, this was a really cool cold open about the Philadelphia Project, which I'll get into, but well, let's get into it right now. So if you're unaware, Stranger Things was originally based off of this concept from where I live on Long Island. And I've talked about this on the Stranger Things podcasts I've done in the past. If I can remember exactly which ones, I'll tag them in the show notes. But I'll make a Stranger Things playlist of all of the Stranger Things stuff that I've covered so far, and I'll put it in the playlist. So if you want to just go and listen, you can. So where I grew up on Long Island, all the way at the end is called Montauk, and there is a government lab out there. This is true. It's abandoned. I'm pretty sure there's no active work that's actually happening there right now. And I have also talked on this podcast about my spiritual experiences with this specific place. Like when you go to Montauk, I can't describe it. It's like the air changes. I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist because I'm not, but there is something to this energy out there. Like when you go to Montauk, there are time slips. It's very weird. It is a weird place to be. It's a beautiful place to be. I love Montauk. I'm quicker to go literally anywhere else on Long Island for the same thing that you can get at Montauk because it's got this weight to being there. And I've talked on this podcast before about a spiritual experience that my mentor who taught me tarot, that she had with time slipping. So essentially they were going to make Stranger Things off of this project called the Montauk Project. This project, speculative, we don't know that it's true, is essentially based off of this Montauk station, air station, which is Camp Hero. And this is where, allegedly, during the Cold War, they would use children whose psyches are a little bit more open, their consciousness a little bit more open, and they would perform these types of experiments on them where these children could go back in time. It was around mind control, but a lot of the things that I've heard had less to do with mind control and more to do with like teleporting and time travel, time slipping. So now we have this like second similar conspiracy theory, which is the Philadelphia Project. And that was what the Cold Open focused on. The Philadelphia Project, unlike the Montauk Project, does also take place during a war, but instead of it being the Cold War with the Russians, we are in World War II. And this is a project that's also called Project Rainbow. So we're getting a lot of like the pull into like the Rainbow Room, all of this kind of stuff, right? This was a ship. It was the U.S. Navy. It was called the USS Eldridge. And they were using some sort of technology that they were trying to render their ship invisible so that they would be able to go and attack and not be seen. And what ended up happening, again, speculative, allegedly, is that they opened up some sort of portal and they are time slipping. And there have been sightings of this boat across different periods of time. My mentor and I had actually watched an episode of television on this from The Mystery of Science and Time about accidental time travelers. So whether it's true or not true, I don't know. I'm less in a conspiracy theorist way. I feel like I need to mention this like multiple times. Like I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you know, I have a profession in spirituality, and I think that there is more that is possible in this conscious universe than we even conceptualize and perceive. The idea of time slipping happens to me all the time. I'm not saying like I find myself in like 1950s America, but this like loss of time or time being funky and weird. I think all of that's really cool. So I'm pretty sure based off of the way that the show is describing the Philadelphia Project in its cold open, essentially is that instead of the ship disappearing and slipping through time, the ship opened a portal to the upside down and they all died. They all got eaten by demogorgons in the cold open, except for one person, which happened to be Dr. Brenner's father. So two Brenner men of science, perhaps, and have found themselves in these circumstances where the son is now continuing the work of the father who went to this other dimension. So that seems kind of significant to the storytelling, but you know, whatever. So clearly the Duffer Brothers are interested in these stories or these myths or these urban legends about time travel, portal opening, etc. I'm just being honest. Hot men in the 1940s in World War II on a Navy ship slipping through time sounds less scary to me than men ending up in the upside down or anyone ending up in the upside down. The upside down is like not a place I want to go, but slipping through time where I, a girl, could find myself at Standing Stones in Inverness and put my hands upon them and end up in the arms of James Frazier. Like, yeah, time slipping is a little romantic to me, okay? Sue me. So the show Foreshadow is immersive in a multimedia type of way. There are projections, there's videos, there's practical effects, but the multimedia storytelling is really great, and it fills in so many of the gaps, and it gives you that sense that you're watching a Netflix show at certain points of the show. So it's really cool. There was some upside down sequences that were really incredible. Like I said, the beginning where they're on this Project Rainbow, the USS Eldridge, that all looked fantastic. But even before the play started, when we sat down in our seats, it was playing WBOB, and it was hosted by Bob, the Brain newbie. So it's playing all of these hits, and then every like couple of songs, he would be like, Joyce, this goes out to you from Lonnie, who's like saying, sorry, baby, he didn't mean it, really funny stuff as you're sitting down and like really getting immersed into this world and back into the Stranger Things vibe. Then during intermission, right? The lights came up for intermission. I ran to the bathroom at the very, very end of intermission. Like there was only 3 minutes left. And even as I was going to the bathroom, like right before they were about to start act two, the lights were flickering outside of the theater, all the way to the bathroom, sort of. And the show took place at the Marquee, which is a huge Marriott. So the fact that like they have this like compliancy with Marriott to have like their lights flickering all the way to the bathroom is really, really cool. That was pretty immersive. I was really tickled by that. Multiple times throughout the show, there are cast members who wandered through the audience. At one point, a group of scientists with their like hazmat suits came through. They were picking up people's backpacks. They were taking people's demogorgons. And, shining flashlights in all of our eyes. Like it was really fun multiple times to have so many people from the cast kind of be in the space with the audience. It just felt like the production was really constantly trying to erase the boundary between the world of the play and like sort of the Netflix experience and the audience. And that I really quite enjoyed. I think my favorite moment like this happened at the very, very end. The play ended, and then all of a sudden, as you're clapping and you're starting to give your ovations, the Netflix music kind of cues in again. And then at the very bottom, because there is a screen, it's multimedia again, like I said, it said play next episode. So the next episode you see starts loading, which obviously would be Stranger Things proper. But at the very last second, a mouse kind of comes through and clicks and it says watch credits, and the screen goes up. And there is our cast, and they are there for their bows, which I thought was really, really great. I thought it was clever. I thought it was self-aware. I thought it was clearly making itself known to us that it knows what it's doing. It knows its audience. And I thought it worked perfectly. Now we have some critiques. As much as I loved it, my sisters and I, and my mom, who got a very quick Stranger Things education before we had gone to see the finale, all of us looked around to each other leaving that theater and were asking the questions like, this story is apparently canon, and it filled in a lot of gaps about what happened in the last season. So it's not like this is some strange like optical side quest of fan fiction, or like another thread that the Duffer Brothers wanted to pull out that maybe there wasn't enough time. This feels like, especially because Act 1 and 2 were both like an hour and a half, I don't understand why they didn't just film these 2 episodes and release it ahead of season 5. I feel like that would have been doable, especially because the play would have already been happening. They could have done like a private viewing of the show or a filmed viewing of the show, even if they didn't want to get cast and crew and do it as a full-scale production. Obviously, Stranger Things is a high-scale production, so I'm not saying they needed to like fully produce this, but they could have at least filmed the play and made this available to a general audience, because there was a lot in there and a lot from the play that fills in the gaps about what was happening in this final season, especially with Henry and his story and his mythology. The entire play functions like Netflix episodes. So after the cold open, we have the Stranger Things title, the music is playing, and then it sort of says, where we would normally get the title of the episode. We got Act 1, which was called Chapter 1, The Girl from Nowhere. And then same thing when we came back from intermission, there was not another Stranger Things musical cue, but there was Chapter 2, Captain Midnight. So they did have titles. They had Netflix named titles. It operated the same way that you would watch a Stranger Things episode, how we've seen those titles for 10 years now. So I just feel like this should have been 2 episodes that were ahead of season 5 for people to be able to understand what was happening. And I found myself wondering, like, why a significant chunk of the story is only available to people who can physically get to Broadway. As a theater fan, I love seeing anything on stage, any sort of stage production, and I love seeing it treated as important storytelling because it is. And there's something magical about being in a theater. But as somebody who cares about accessibility, I'm sitting there the entire show thinking, why are we gatekeeping this lore? It's major lore, and we're gatekeeping it behind airfare and Broadway ticket prices. I don't know how much longer this will run. I mean, I know they have Netflix dollars that are probably behind the show producing it, but there was a lot of empty seats. I don't know if it's just because we're so far away from the end of Stranger Things, or just like now that Stranger Things is over and people have gotten what they've gotten, they don't have a taste for finding out additional lore to this show. I'm not really sure what it is, but I'm curious how much longer Stranger Things will run. Though I will say the show is phenomenal. I thought it was great, but there was a lot of empty seats in the house. Thematically, the play feels very similar to Stranger Things. It's still a show that is talking about outsiders and weird kids and loneliness and the concept of belonging and who you belong to and friendship and love, right? Like the idea that human connection can be the pushback against fear and monsters and these big government threats. Nothing about the show in particular felt disconnected from the play. They felt very interconnected. If anything, it felt like a natural extension of everything that Stranger Things has always been interested in exploring. And similarly, in Stranger Things proper, where we have Nancy and Joyce, who are these sort of really smart detectives who could put a puzzle together and yet they are consistently ignored. Very similar to what happens here in this show. So the show really emphasizes Virginia Creel, who is Henry's mom. Now, in the TV show, we get a lot about Victor Creel. We have Nancy and Robin who go on this like quest to find out what happened with Victor Creel, and they end up getting some time with him in jail, and they find out that there's foul play happening, essentially, that it was his son. So the play is really focused on Virginia Creel, who I would say is probably the clearest example. She's hyper aware that something is deeply wrong with Henry, that there has been a change in him. And by the time we're at this place with Henry, it's been a few years since he's encountered this shadow from Stranger Things proper that we've seen of him in the cave, where the mind flayer attaches himself to Henry like a symbiote. So that event happens when Henry is 11. Henry is now in high school, which means he's a freshman, so he's 14 years old. So this is about 3 years after, 14 or 15, 3 to 4 years after he's encountered the mind flayer for the first time, and he's been fending off the mind flayer all of this time. Virginia Creel is terrified. She is trying to protect her family. She grows increasingly more afraid of Henry, the more connected to the mind flayer that and yet she's the one who's being sort of diagnosed with delusions and hallucinations, the one that's being offered tranquilizers, essentially, to be able to calm herself down. And the only person that ends up listening to her is Dr. Brenner. And Brenner isn't listening to her because he respects her. Dr. Brenner is listening to her because he sees an opportunity, because Virginia is useful to him. And he's not trying to protect her. He's trying to monopolize off of her fear as well. Patty's story works in a very similar fashion. Now, Patty is Patty Newby, who is Bob Newby's sister. We're going to talk a little bit more about her story as we go through, because Patty becomes one of the emotional centers of the play. She's by far one of the principal actors in the show. She is Henry's love interest. She understands Henry in a way that almost no one else does, even though he lets her in. She doesn't fully comprehend, maybe even until the end. She becomes an anchor for him, though. And at one point, she is literally helping him hold back the mind flayer in the darkness, which is about to fully attach itself to his brain. They're running tests. And yet she tells Henry that she is not afraid of him and that she cares for him. And that sort of like recedes the mind flayer for now. So, of course, she becomes target number one because this girl is now the obstacle that is keeping the mind flayer from fully attaching to Henry. And that's what Brenner wants. Patty also consistently insists on being her own person and doing her own thing. So there's a really interesting moment when Henry does share his powers with her. They're trying to find her mother. So in the show, they are in that liminal space that Elle goes to that has the water, it's black. That's how it presents for her when we're in her mind. So in Henry's mind, he's able to sort of, use his powers to locate Patty's mom. And she's in Vegas. She's a showgirl. And so we've got this like big showgirl sequence that is happening. And Henry starts to manipulate it. And it's a very funny sequence and it was really cool in the show. But at one point, Patty is sort of stripped down from her conservative clothing into a glittery Vegas-esque bodysuit. And at that point, she goes, "This is your dream, not mine." And I love this moment because so many stories ask women to exist as characters primarily as emotional support systems for the men around them. And Patty is that. We've all seen this before. But Patty refuses to sort of let his dream dictate what she actually wants, which is to find her mom. So, a problem about any sort of story where women are centered and yet written by men is a story where we are going to understand that despite the fact that the women, and in this case, Patty, has a completely separate goal from Henry, she is going to end up as a part of the machinery that ends up explaining his story. Patty is not even mentioned in the TV show, and the play had been out at this point. To not mention Patty in the TV show feels like the biggest slight, especially since she's a huge part of what has driven him to this point. So a little bit more on Patty in a second. Let's talk about Joyce. The girl who played Joyce, phenomenal. She was like a young Winona Ryder. It was incredible. We'll also say right here, before we dive into Joyce, not enough Karen Wheeler. Not enough Karen Wheeler in the show. Not enough Karen Wheeler in the play. It was almost weird to have Karen and Ted as named characters when they did nothing but make out and had maybe one or two lines. But Joyce, Hopper, Bob, all of our other characters, Eddie Munson's uncle, Alan Munson, all of these characters who we have spent some time with, it felt really cool to hang out with them again in a high school setting. So I loved seeing young Joyce. She felt very recognizable to the Joyce that we know from the series. She's very curious. She's determined. She's asking questions. She's investigating. She has this really good banter with Hopper that I thought that they mimicked really well from the banter that Joyce and Hopper have from the show. That felt really good as a thread to pull us back into the world and into these characters. But I will also say, when Joyce starts to get involved in this investigation in which there is an investigation about all of the animals in Hawkins that are being killed, particularly people's pets. This is being driven by Henry. We know this. But they don't know it yet. And so they're trying to figure out who is killing the pets of Hawkins. Joyce does all of this research, comes with all of these books that are all highlighted, emphasized, marginalized. Joyce comes with all of these books about how PTSD essentially is affecting people, particularly Victor Creel, who she also uncovers killed a family and is guilt-ridden by this and has a lot of PTSD over this. And so she does all of this research. She hands it over to Jim. Jim is like, my dad's not going to accept this as proof. Why? Does research not count as a reasonable conclusion anymore? So it was like an interesting thing to see that as well, the way that Joyce handles things where she is the one that is collecting this tangible evidence, right? The pictures that Will draws, like the magnets, like all of these physical things that other people are just sort of writing off, even Hopper into the future. And yet this has always been a part of their dynamic. So that was really cool to see as well. Even in the very beginning of the show, as they're making introductions to the characters, we're sort of getting a lowdown of who all of these characters are. They say Ted Wheeler, dumb as rocks, basically, whatever they said about him. And they were like, Karen Wheeler, super smart. So we have all of these women who are being promoted as very smart, very intellectualized, can think things through. It's not a matter of whether or not they understand what is unfolding around them. The question I think that the show is interested in exploring is like, who gets believed? So even Patty's family story revolves around this question. So we end up learning through Henry in an attempt to push Patty away from the mind flayer. We learn that Patty's father, who is the principal of Hawkins High and has been presumably for some time, had an affair with one of his students and immediately decides that he's going to proclaim that she's unfit so that he can take the baby, which is Patty, who is legitimately his daughter, and have the mother sent away so that this is not a problem or anything that gets out for him. So he's an authority figure. Not only does he take advantage of a student, but then he takes advantage of his race, in which he is a white man who had an affair with a young Black woman, and takes advantage of his status, in which he is older and more established, has more money, has a stable job, like whatever it is that he's leveraging. The show doesn't go like into the semantics and the details, but one can make a conclusion, right? He's an authority figure. He's respected. He's a man, and he is the one who ends up with Patty, even though he deeply resents her and lets her know at every possible opportunity that he resents her. But the woman is treated as the problem. She is the one who is labeled as unstable, right? She is the one who gets erased and pushed out of the picture and is forced to give up her daughter. Patty then spends years living with the consequences of this choice, of this secret. And again, very typical to Stranger Things nature. But Henry is consistently rewarded for engaging with the mind flayer in any capacity. Brenner encourages it, he validates it, he helps to feed it. And so for every kill that Henry makes towards an animal, Henry becomes more powerful. He is absorbing their essence, which we learn through Brenner's explanation. Like, that's why you feel more powerful. So by the time we get to the crux where Brenner is like, you need to kill a person, he brings in an inmate. He says, this inmate has signed a consent form for you to kill him. He wants the death sentence. Henry decides that that's too much, but the confrontation that Brenner and Henry have about this pushes Henry to go home and realize an ultimate betrayal of his mother, who is basically like, have him committed, have him locked up, and throw away the key. That betrayal is what leads Henry to kill his family, which we know from the TV series. Meanwhile, we have other male characters who get punished whenever they attempt vulnerability. So Hopper, for example, has a relationship with his father that is especially heartbreaking because Hopper wants to divert his path from his father, who is the chief of police. He's abusive. He wants to ship Hopper off to the military. Multiple times Hopper is like, don't call me Junior. Don't call me James Hopper Jr. His father keeps calling him Junior. He says it multiple times, and his father never complies with this, never listens to him. When Hopper gains evidence and is out on the case and is like working this investigation, his father doesn't believe him then either. And so across multiple storylines, the play seems to suggest that boys are taught to respond to fear through control and aggression and dominion. And then the women are sort of left managing the emotional fallout, which I would say is a staple of the patriarchy. Hello. Hi. And while I will say that Virginia, Patty, and Joyce are not decorative characters, they are certainly fully fleshed out. This is still Henry Creel's origin story. And that's the purpose of this. That's the gravitational center of the entire narrative, is understanding how Henry came to be. And so we see this sort of awkward, fumbling, really incredibly weird boy, really awkward, doesn't know how to hit on Patty, seems scrawny and unimposing. Although at one point his shirt comes off and I looked at my sisters and I was like, that boy's ripped. He must be in his like mid-20s, but playing a very young character, very clean faced, has that comb over like Henry had when we've seen him in the TV series. Really brilliant acting for sure. And then at the very, very end of the play, we see that they have been extracting Henry's blood. They're using Henry's blood to infuse it with other children so that these other children can have the same type of powers that Henry has. And that is when we get sort of an introduction to 11, a very young 11 in the play. Just a quick little like wink and nod for us, the audience. But honestly, like at the very, very end of the show, his comb over is combed out. It's like his shaggy hair. So you can start to see the resemblance to a Jamie Campbell Bower-esque character, in which at one point I did lean over and say to my sisters, how are we supposed to believe that this fumbling, awkward teenage loser, really, he's a square if we're going in terms of like 50s terminology, is supposed to be the hottest man alive, Jamie Campbell Bower? How are we supposed to believe that one turned into the other? Because Jamie Campbell Bower is so incredibly delectable to me, like one of the most perfect specimens on planet Earth. And I'm sorry, Jamie, for completely objectifying you in the very small, less than 1% chance that you ever listen to this podcast. I'm sorry that I had just completely objectified you. But I will say, I did lean over to my sisters and go, how is this boy supposed to be Jamie Campbell Bower in the future? Those are sort of my thoughts on everything that happens in Stranger Things Foreshadow. So thank you for listening to this ramble of thoughts. But I thought it was worth mentioning because we covered it on this show and it felt like it filled in a lot of gaps for me. I thought it was really rich in its feminist theming. I still think it's strange that none of these characters mention that this has happened before, but okay. I hope that they end up releasing this for people to watch on Netflix. So, love you all. See you then. And remember, stranger things have happened.